Classroom of the Elite Year 2 Volume 1. The start of the second year began with much promises for an action-packed year with much psychological warfare. Many new characters introduced, plus the old characters who had much character development had some comparisons with their past selves and they have firmly established this new better personalities of theirs. And most importantly, the premise of second year finally has an actual antagonist. I mean, Ayonkoji felt like as much of an antagonist as he was the protagonist, but it's still a much awaited addition to the series. And mind you, when I say antagonist, I don't necessarily mean just the White Room student. There's a high chance of White Room siding with Ayonkoji later on, or rather, becoming his tool, so I don't want to be too quick to judge the characters. I get more antagonist vibes from Tsukishiro or Nagumo. Nagumo in particular because he is a proper asshole who acts like a villain, and now since his obsession the older Horikita is gone, we can finally see him go head to head with Ayonkoji, somewhere in the future. Then there is Tsukishiro, who is quite obviously more than he lets on. He is not just a henchman for Mr. Ayonkoji. And of course there is Mr. Ayonkoji himself, the dad who just wants his son to be his exclusive personal property. So let's start with the prologue of Volume 1. Where we see Tsukishiro explaining the plans to the White Room student. Of course here no personal information about the White Room student is leaked. After reading through some shitty translations but afterwards finally from a TL note, it said that Tsukishiro was basically addressing him in a way that could be either a he or she. Obviously Tsukishiro is quite respectful towards people of all genders and treats them very equally, doesn't want to offend anyone. Everyone can appreciate that. Although this does indicate that the White Room student could be a Karen. Anyway, they seem to be studying other students' profile in a properly documented manner. Privacy be damned, and they also had Ayonkoji's earlier records from before, while he was in the White Room. And it was monstrous, to such a degree that even Tsukishiro was surprised when he saw it. I expected nothing less from the T-Rex. Tsukishiro seemed to be confirming the plans with the White Room student, and Tsukishiro found the White Room student's behavior quite unusual and became a bit suspicious of him or her. We also get another piece of information, that Tsukishiro mentioned was quite well known. And that is, you can get a rise out of any of the White Room student when you mention Ayonkoji. The students there, no doubt, are jealous of Ayonkoji. I do have to say though, which group is it well known among exactly? I mean, the White Room is supposed to be a top secret that a few elites should know about. But I do have to say these elites few who know about the White Room are quite casual about the top secret. Bringing their child to White Room like it's a frickin' national bring your child to work day. And then gossiping about the drama between the students in there. Anyway, we see the White Room student isn't quite as cooperative with Tsukishiro and might be hiding something from him. Then we get to the first chapter where we just get a definition of the true meaning of ability. Much like the talk about the true equality was stated in the first chapter in Volume 1. We got a recap on the information about the school, its special rules and its students, basically just emphasizing to us that this isn't Volume 12 but rather Year 2 Volume 1. And then with the One Piece recap out of the way, we get straight to our unreliable narrator and protagonist Ayonkoji Kiyotaka. With the end of the spring break, the Class D moves into their new classroom. It looks much the same as their classroom before except for a few changes. They got a smart board finally catching up to the modern technology. They got tablets instead of books. I mean, they are a famous school after all. Another weird change is that you can buy where you want to sit with the points. And now when I first heard that, the first thing to go through my mind was that Horikita and Ayonkoji won't be neighbors anymore. And that Sudo would surely buy the seat next to Horikita. Both terrible news. But surprisingly Sudo didn't buy the seat next to Horikita. I think at least, they didn't really go into much details about where everyone sat. Talking about Horikita, everyone was quite surprised to see her sudden change in hairstyle. The short hair brought along a lot of looks and questions that Horikita found nonsensical to deal with. Sudo and Kushida were the most shocked because one loved her and the other hated her. In fact, Sudo loved Horikita so much that he quickly changed the hair length of the Horikita in his vivid fantasies. And Kushida hated her so much that she decided to change her own hairstyle to make sure she and Horikita didn't match. Of course the reason for such a change was quite difficult to explain, so Horikita trailed off talking about something like heartbreak. Needles to this horrified Sudo quite a bit. I don't think it would have made the matter better if Horikita had followed that up with, actually it was cause of my brother. The unrest caused by Horikita's short hair was calmed down afterwards as everyone was accepting of it. Although Horikita wouldn't have cared if they weren't. Then there was the special exam they faced in this volume. An academic exam where you had to pair up with first years and there were points reward for the pair who scored the highest. Now this exam was favorable towards the bet that Horikita and Ayonkoji had made in the previous volume. Just to freshen up your memory. The bet was that Horikita would choose one subject to compete in, and she could disclose what exactly that subject is anytime she wants. She may as well could have said it just 10 minutes before the exam had begun, speaking of which it isn't exactly stated when she disclosed the subject to Ayonkoji, but I do think she disclosed it very late. The finer details of the bet were that if Horikita scored more points than Ayonkoji, he would have to seriously contribute towards the betterment of the class. And if Ayonkoji scored a perfect score, Horikita would have to join the student council. Now when Chayabashira-sensei talked about the academic exam, she said it would be extremely tough. In fact, she deemed scoring more than 90 simply impossible for their current standard. And just told the students that you don't need to be worrying too much about scoring high since you won't be scoring more than 90 anyway, and just waved them off. Now coming from a teacher, that's kind of a big deal. Horikita heard that and thought it would just add more credibility to Ayonkoji's abilities since that's what she was trying to confirm after all. Of course, saying this, I think everyone knew since the whole bet started that no way in hell would Ayonkoji score anything less than 100 no matter how freaking tough the question is. And that's what he did, which quite honestly, Chayabashira-sensei was more excited about than anyone else. I mean, she did deem scoring high impossible before, but that was her not counting Ayonkoji into the equation. Plus she also obviously didn't know enough about his abilities and just knew about how awesome our boy is, half from the things she heard and the other half from her vivid imagination. I mean, she definitely did cook up some shit about Ayonkoji in her mind, what with her, Icarus's fall, and him not losing in any exam. No matter how close they were to the truth, they were merely speculations she arrived at from very little information. Even Ayonkoji once mentioned that Chayabashira-sensei had some weird fantasy about him, I think in volume 11. And just like any other enthusiastic fanfic writer, when she found out her fantasy coming to life out of nowhere, she was very pleasantly surprised and couldn't stop shaking from excitement. Moving on from the main spice in this volume were of course the first-year students, but before talking about them let's talk about the Ayonkoji group, which Ayonkoji himself had been neglecting over the past period of time. I don't think he once hung out with them on the spring break, and when Akito came to talk with him about it, it was more like he was reminding the readers as well as Ayonkoji that the group did in fact still existed. Thinking about the group, I think it would be more interesting if we get a confrontation between them individually rather in a group. Cause first off all, let's start with the two people in the group that have been seriously overshadowed, Akito and Sakura. Akito is still a character that we don't know much about, with some parts of his past told about, which we might someday in the future delve more into. So he kind of still has a hope. But at least right now he seems like the guy who just rolls around with whatever, which would have been cool if we didn't already have a superior version of him already there in the series. And so he is a bit stale. Sakura on the other hand was a typical waifu in the past who has now become more of just a fan service character who we don't see much of. I do think there was foreshadowing of Ayonkoji becoming more distant towards Sakura as he exposes more of his abilities and becomes unreachable for the plain kind, shy girl Sakura thinks herself to be. She is sweet and obviously could just change her whole reputation in the class just by not wearing her glasses. But I don't see it happening anytime soon. Then there is Yukimura, not the most likable character in the group but definitely the most spicy and very much interesting. We do know his backstory, he is realistic. Annoying at times but also relatable. Then there is a possible harem contender, Haruka. I personally really like Haruka. She brings group together, doesn't give a shit about the girls' cliché group or who stands higher on the frickin' social ladder, and more importantly her monologue shows that she did have some thoughts about Ayonkoji being more than what he let on, and then how she might be inclined to like him or at least be fascinated by him. And the thing is, I would love to hear her monologue when Ayonkoji does display his abilities. Then let's talk about the first years. From one tweet we do know that the White Room student is one of the people from this photo right here. Moreover, these first years are given a huge advantage by having the rules explained to them by Nagumo, plus there is much fuckery going on. Of course Nagumo won't just go ahead and explain TBE rules AD make life easier for the first year, okay, his own. Tsukishiro is behind him and his plan for this exam was to basically put a bounty on Ayonkoji's head. A group of talented first years wedding filled in on the details of this particular bounty hunting special exam. Now talking about these first years. First is the problematic group of first year. There comes a new waifu that was in the cover that immediately started liking for some reason. I mean, I can see where they come from after taking a look at her, but still that's quite short-sighted. Especially since, at least personally in this volume, Nanase was quite the hypocrite. She talked about how she didn't like violence, but didn't really take much persuasive actions when her supposed partner, Hosen, acted violent. I mean, let's get some things straight. Whenever Hosen acted violent, Nanase's response to it was pretty late. When Hosen was choking Ibuki, Nanase spoke just about last, when he was almost done having his fun. Then she talked to Ayonkoji about how she detested Hosen's action but still continued to be his partner. Moreover, when Horikita and Sudo were getting beaten up by Hosen, Nance didn't get in between, didn't even go to call any teacher. As much as she spoke about how she didn't agree with Hosen's method, she went along with them all the same. Then she did intervene when Hosen pulled out the knife, but let's be sensible here. Nanase is smart enough to know how screwed they will be if Hosen truly did use the knife, plus Hosen had a whole another plan involving the knife, so Nanase didn't intervene solely to save Ayonkoji, unlike what she said when she stood before Hosen. And then there was the scene when Ayonkoji let himself be stabbed and Nanase asked him weird creepy questions about that, and Ayonkoji mentioned in his monologue about how Nanase didn't look empathetic when she stared at Ayonkoji's bloody wound. In fact, she looked quite emotionless. There was another interesting episode with Nanase when Ayonkoji and her were sitting in the library and out of the blue Nanase blurted out that Ayonkoji was a monster. Totally out of the blue. In fact, just earlier she was talking nice to him, talking kindly, and then she just went calling him a monster and it was blowed over like it was nothing. Ayonkoji didn't have much of a reaction, but he still could have just pursued the topic a bit more aggressively, but then nothing. Nothing happened. Nanase called him a monster, showed her bad side for a while and then went back to being a good girl, and that was it. Needless to say, this volume didn't really give me a good impression of the first year. In fact, that's the same case with almost all the first year students. Now let's talk about her partner and the verified leader of the class 1D, Hosen. Hosen is a buffy version of the past Ryuin if he was short-tempered and orthodox. They literally took all of Ryuin's bad parts, minus some IQ. He was brazen enough to approach the second-year Class D for a supposed alliance offer, while clearly acting in a condescending manner that stopped Horikita from signing the alliance with them at once. He was someone who lived in Ryuin's locality, which, as we know from Akito, was something of an area where mob live. I have to say his first interaction with the second years didn't go well. He was basically picking a fight with each and every one of them. Even when he saw Ryuin, who was famous in his locality, he tried to pick fight with him and Ryuin's gang. But Ryuin knew enough about the school rules to not needlessly start a fight, but things were a bit different now. And Hosen had been informed of that. Hosen literally chalked Ibuki, went straight for her neck, which would have resulted in severe consequences before, but now that Nagumo was the president, most small violence was overcooked. But it was not a cool move. Nobody likes a senseless bully. Still, Ryuin was quite calm and didn't give in to Hosen's obvious provocation. In the start, Hosen seemed more like Sudo, but then we do learn that Hosen is actually quite cunning too. Still short-tempered and not really on the level of someone like Ryuin. But he was quick to bring his class together in the exam. He ruled with fear, warned all his classmates to not form a pair with any senior, unless he ordered them to. Moreover, he also had this whole plan with Aikika, so he did have a strategy to get Ayonkoji expelled. To claim that juicy bounty, and moreover he knew exactly what Horikita wanted from her deal about the upcoming special exam and the advantage the first year held, and he thoroughly exploited it. Or more like he just screwed with them. Horikita tried to build a relationship of trust between the two classes that wouldn't help them just in this test but also in the exams in the future. She brought her a game to the negotiations, and we truly see how her character has developed. There was once a time when she just couldn't tolerate bullish attitude like that of Sudo and lashed out at them, deeming such people useless. But in this case she wanted the long-term benefit. Things not going as she wanted is just a shame. As Ayonkoji himself said, the negotiations not going as planned wasn't Horikita's fault. It was just the imbalance of information. Hosen's main mission was to earn the bounty points that he would get from expelling Ayonkoji. He gave Horikita false hope by going up to the second-year Class D earlier. His plan involved them in a such much like that where they ended up after the negotiations had failed. Firstly, in the karaoke he threw water on Horikita's face, dissed everyone and walked off. But Horikita still didn't give up hope because she was getting mixed signals from Hosen. And then Hosen, when he was walking off while Sudo, Horikita and Ayonkoji followed him, talked about how he might reconsider, so they moved on to a shady ally. Just like Hosen had planned. Then he basically went full bully on them, beat Sudo to ground, and Ayonkoji did talk about him being stronger than freaking Albert, so that was something. Nanase, on the other hand, was a guard who prevented anyone to escape to call a police. She of course was in on the plan and knew that Horikita and the others were going to get beaten up here, and she literally made sure that happened. At least for a while. Horikita was seeing now that negotiating was pointless, but then she did get bitch slapped. Even lost conscious for a while there. Sudo didn't really appreciate that kind of gender equality, but then again he was powerless against Hosen. And then he got out the knife and set his eyes on Ayonkoji, and then Nanase intervened. She talked about how she couldn't follow through with the plan, couldn't stand the violence, but I do think it would be quite naive to think Nanase intervened solely out of her goodwill. Anyway, Ayonkoji hadn't involved himself much. Just like he did in every other exam, he let Horikita try her hardest, and when she eventually fails, he stepped up and always did the good old job. This time though I do think he was very passive until literally the last few minutes. But he did go the whole Ayonkoji Kiyotaka psychopathic god mode in the last few minutes. He saw through Hosen's plan, which was quite insane in and of itself. Hosen's plan was to basically act like he got stabbed by Ayonkoji and then get expelled. He made quite the scenario which would support his claim, and then he went to buy the knife so he could stab himself and balm it on Kiyotaka. That was the plan he came up with all on his own. But when he was going to buy the knife, Aikika showed up and offered an even better version of the plan. She provided Hosen with the knife Ayonkoji had brought himself so it would further support his claim. Needless to say, Hosen's plan was going as expected. Until he advanced onto Ayonkoji, and Ayonkoji straight up threw paper on the knife. He charged and blocked the knife which Hosen was aiming at his thigh and let the knife stab his hand instead. Ayonkoji used Hosen's strategy against him. Although Hosen's plan was quite insane, Ayonkoji showed him that he was quite insane himself. Now, even though the knife belonged to Ayonkoji, the physical evidence was against Hosen, and an investigation would show that Hosen did try to buy a knife earlier. Now Ayonkoji held the advantage, and Hosen had no choice but to follow Ayonkoji's demand if he didn't want to get expelled. There were just two demands. The first year and second year class came to a deal without having to spend any point, plus Ayonkoji wanted to pair up with Hosen. Because Hosen was very unlikely to be the White Room student, behavior and past considered. On to the next first year, there is Aikika. In first year class A, she readily approached Ayonkoji and Horikita on her own, looking for a senior student to pair up with. It was a very good deal, enough to cause some suspicious, but then Aikika turned out to be quite kinky, not interested in anyone but a strong man who can cook. And that somehow ended up Ayonkoji cooking food for her in exchange of her pairing up with Sudo. Now the destined day when Ayonkoji was supposed to cook for her turned into quite a date. She got him to buy things that she needed for herself and acted quite bullish. Although we later learned that Aikika did have another objective aside from just getting Ayonkoji broke. The petty knife affair. I do have to say that one thing that ticks me about all these first years is that they are far too arrogant. Each and every one of them is arrogant, even the students in the class D which were approached by Horikita were quite condescending. Now there were also other students. There was the very suspicious Yagami that seemed to know Kushida from junior high and readily paired up with her. He didn't get involved with Ayonkoji at all, and he seemed excessively like a good kind boy just based on his features alone, so he is a bit sus. There were the class C students, Utomiya and Tsubaki. They did casually approach Ayonkoji to pair up with him, and knowing about the bounty I don't think they had good intentions. We saw less of them, although Tsubaki did approach Ayonkoji personally in quite the unique way with her lollipop and all. While Utomiya seems a bit stuck up and serious, Tsubaki is more of a casual case with small introvert weird habits. Now let's talk about the characters we already know about. The battle between Sakyongi and Ryuin is still going strong, although in a small scale. Ryuin is basically scamming first years, scaring them into signing a contract that was less than what was promised. Sakyongi on the other hand is going for straight-up rich strategy, since she does have enough fun to back it up. She keeps raising the price offered to the first year and Ryuin keeps matching it. Ichino's as always has gone down the good route, using her charisma to chat up with the first years. Even arranging a meet-up with speech and all. Although Horikita and the other people have remarked it a bit stupid since she is accepting any student THT comes up to her. Even those with bad grades. So once again Aikino's class isn't going for the win. For the umpteenth time. Then there is Horikita, who is also not really aiming for the top spot. She wants her class to do well but also wants other first years trust that would help them in the long run. A bit like what Ichino's is doing but not really. Of course her strategy failed and more importantly she lost the bet. I mean in both cases though she couldn't really blamed. When the pairs were formed between first year and second year class D everyone got paired such that it averaged out their academic abilities. Moreover Nanase paired up with Kuenji. And it was quite the surprise that Kuenji deemed her worthy enough to be her partner. Then there is the waifu Kei. Horny Koji took quite the shots with her, flirting trying to get a kiss, got quite close but damn doorbell rang and then Kei found out about the potential harem contender who was alone with her boyfriend in his room. Kei was quite jealous. Kei also had a rather heated talk with Sato. Sato kind of figured out that there was something going on between Kei and Kiyotaka and she obviously felt angry. Especially since she had once asked Kei to help her with a Yonko-ji, she felt quite betrayed. She even slapped Kei. Kei handled that pretty well, didn't act like a typical guru like she does with most of her other friends, and instead was understanding. But I guess in the end, that was the closure Sato needed to fully move on. But more importantly Ayonko-ji decided to show off his ability. Did what he said he would in the test and scored 100 on maths, which was deemed impossible for someone of his class. Everyone was shocked out of their mind when they saw that in their tablet. The only guy to get a perfect score, and that came out of nowhere to them. But before they could pester him about it, Ayonko-ji was called to meet Tsukishiro. Ayonko-ji also talked about how he should flaunt a bit more of his ability for his safety in the future. He also saw that if Tsukishiro was salty he didn't let it show. Now here comes the interesting part. Ayonko-ji says that the White Room student didn't involve himself or herself in this exam. And I wanna trust Ayonko-ji on this one. Whoever the White Room student is, they didn't get involved with Ayonko-ji in this test or else he would have at least known a bit about it. So with his insight in mind, I am gonna bet that at least Aikika isn't the White Room student. She was very involved with Ayonko-ji in this incident and kept quite close to him, and Ayonko-ji still said the White Room student didn't approach him. So that's it.